Hi everyone. In this module, we're making some important connections between all of the things that we've been learning about in terms of what autism spectrum disorder is, why we're interested in considering specifically behaviors and manifestations, in other words, how it shows up and the functions of those behaviors, and then thinking about what that behavior might mean for programming in multiple domains or areas outside of just behavior, because behavior has an impact on multiple areas when we're thinking about programming. But we've also been talking about evidence-based practices. So now we're shifting into thinking we know a lot of concepts and facts about how to access evidence-based practices and why they're important, why we consider multiple domains and the functions of behaviors, why we're focusing on behavior when we're learning about autism, and autism when we're learning about behavior to become a behavior intervention specialist, and so on. And so now, as we shift into thinking about programming, this is an opportunity to use kind of a miniature case study as a way to walk through some potential things to think about when we're doing programming, outside of just the clicking of boxes. When we think about developing programs, it can be really easy to get caught up in saying this IEP form or this series of steps I have to take mean I do that and I cross it off, and I do that and I cross it off. And that can mean that we might miss something important. So when we're walking through this case study, it's meant to really not give all the specifics, right? Because we're not watching a video or meeting the student, actually. It's just helping you see the complexity that can be involved when we're trying to really identify actual specific areas of need, or what we might call a root cause analysis, that we're trying to say, what do we believe to be the underlying thing here that would, if we develop services and interventions and supports for that thing, might impact positively other areas or domains. It gets really complex really fast. So let's start with what the story is here, just simplified down. The story is we're talking about a 5th grade student who has multiple diagnosed or documented areas of need across multiple domains, so academics, social skills, behavior, communication, things like that. And so because of those documented multiple areas, the case is often that those types of students that have multiple needs have an IEP team that is quite large, because we need lots of areas of expertise to address all of the specific issues. So in this specific case, we're going to say the special education team, the IEP team, was general education teacher, so 5th grade teacher, special educator, the case manager in this case, parents, occupational therapist and physical therapist, speech language pathologist, and administration, in this case, a building principal. So this group meets together to talk about the students' areas of need and having a discussion, as opposed to coming with the documentation of this is the IEP and the IEP goal moving forward. Having a discussion can illuminate some of the things that might be areas of need. So if we're imagining we're at this IEP meeting for this student and a discussion starts to occur, which then becomes a common thread as the parents share something that they're experiencing with their child at home, which is that their child refuses, yells, injures themselves when they're asked to go into unfamiliar areas. And as the team tries to dig into what that means, it sounds like it's kind of transitioning into new areas or traveling between areas. And as that discussion occurs, others on the team agree that they see those same behaviors frequently, and that those behaviors are ultimately having an effect on the student being able to access and then participate in all areas of learning when they're at school. So in this, say, the special education teacher says, yeah, I see that they refuse to travel or transition outside of the classroom when they're asked to do so. Other service providers contribute that we see that behavior is really impacting the student's ability then to gain what they need from other settings or classrooms, because traveling or transitioning between classrooms is an expectation of being in school a lot of the time. And when you're away from learning, frequently you're going to develop further areas of need related to missing instruction in specific key content areas, right? But the idea here is the team didn't just stop and say, let's focus on the negative behaviors that we don't want to see anymore. We're saying refusals, yelling, and self-injurious behaviors when they're harming themselves. Why wouldn't we just focus on those outcomes that we're seeing, which is everybody says, yep, I see refusals all the time. The refusal is the thing that we're going to target. Well, in this case, having that discussion about the why to find the potential root cause rather than making the assumption that it's enough for us to say that behavior is the issue, address the behavior. If you back up as a team and potentially ask the why question, do we believe there's another reason or a root cause of those behaviors? And the family and everybody is able to have that conversation and continue to ask why, to lead back to the idea that potentially communication and then understanding of requests might be the reason that we're engaging in this. But you can see in this example, when we're having that conversation, the different perspectives lead to potential theories. So the PT or OT says, well, maybe the sensory issues that we address or deal with could be the reason that they don't like going into the hallways or passing, is that they find comfort in one setting. And then the student finds that they don't like something about the hallway. It echoes, it's noisy, there's squeaking sneaker sounds. Maybe the sensory issues are the reason that the student refuses to travel or transition. The family says they just don't want to. The 5th grade general education teacher says because they have behaviors, and those behaviors are the things that they're really engaging in, and that's why they're not participating in different settings. The SLP says maybe limited receptive and expressive communication is impacting their ability to understand what is being asked of them in a timely fashion, and then the reason for traveling, and then express their needs of I'm not ready, or I'm scared, or frustrated, or whatever it is. And the special education says that maybe fear and anxiety because of environmental changes could be the things that are impacting the students want to transition or travel, and then therefore the reason they're engaging in behaviors. So having this conversation, you're able to see kind of like that old saying that there are different blind men touching an elephant, right? And they each describe what they're feeling, but they're unable to come to the conclusion that they're all touching an elephant when they're describing a leg, and they're describing a tail, and they're describing an ear. But the idea is it's an elephant, right? And so in this case, the idea appears to be everybody's describing from their perspective something they see with the student, which means we need to come together for a collaborative, multidisciplinary kind of goal that might capture all of these things and potentially the root cause. So in bringing it all together, we want to understand that it sounds like the disability related needs for the student are about communication so that they can understand the prompts that are being asked of them on this left-hand side. Student needs to improve their ability to travel or transition, like physically travel from one location to another without behaviors, because that's where the behaviors were occurring, is in the hallway having meltdowns and falling on the ground and refusing, or right before you even leave the classroom. The student needs to increase their regulated behaviors so that they can engage in instruction and school activities and the behaviors are reduced. And the student needs to use necessary and provided support tools so that they can meet their sensory needs and feel safe, because we're addressing potentially those feelings of safety that were brought up by the various team members, right? So if we're thinking about a collaborative goal that's not necessarily yet written as a measurable goal statement, but what we're saying out loud together as a collaborative team is that the student is going to improve their communication and their travel or transition, which is their disability related need, by responding to the cues or requests of a teacher and increasing their distance traveled outside of the classroom with fewer refusals, which look like yelling and self-injurious or self-harm behavior. And that's the target skill related to their area of need we're going to be addressing, so that their barriers to participation in the classroom and in learning are reduced and access to instruction and activities are increased. Right? So those are the things that we're thinking about that aren't so simple as to say they have behaviors, so we wrote a specific goal related to the student's unwanted behaviors in hopes that other things would then magically sort of fix themselves because we reduced the behavior. But if you're really thinking about it in terms of disability related needs and the target skills and the effect the disability is having, which is usually their access to instruction and activities, which we want them to have, then we're able to write a more meaningful goal. And in our next sessions, we'll start to think about what this means if we have baseline information for actually writing a goal, thinking about data that we're collecting, and how to make informed decisions about whether progress is being made on such a complex goal as this.